taking time to come to our press conference on this really important bill. My name is Representative John Hewitt. I represent Rosemount, Egan, redistricting folks, Rosemount, Egan, and Apple Valley, and I'm proudly doing that. Why does an EMT pick up this bill? This is kind of interesting because if you think when we have a victim, there's a lot of victims, including EMTs, in these scenarios because we work on these patients. We work on the victims, we work on everybody. And last summer, when I should have been door knocking, I was actually going out throughout the state because we have ongoing problems with funding for EMS. But every county administrator I'd meet with, every county commissioner I'd meet with came up with the same thing. John, right now, I can't even pay for the plow that I need this winter. How am I going to pay for EMTs? And then I came back to the Capitol and met with the majority leader here, and he said, I think this would be a real good bill for you to carry because you really do understand what's going on in Minnesota and the funding that we have. But this is a great bill. This bill here that we're going to be presenting on the floor tonight, and I encourage you to watch because you'll hear more of my stories that actually do impact this, will bring much needed help to our county attorneys throughout the state, and they also support this bill wholeheartedly. This is so important to them because when they get a big case, it's devastating in those counties. It costs a lot of money to run it, and who better to run this than our prosecutors here at this level? And don't think that they can just come in. The bill doesn't allow that. They can't just come in and take the case. They have to be asked. And so I'm going to turn it over to the Honorable Keith Hellingston here to talk more about why he needs this help and where we're going with this.
Representative Hewitt, I want to thank you for your advocacy. For 4 years, I have been coming to the Minnesota State Legislature for support to rebuild our criminal unit. For 4 years, we've been explaining the stories of the victims. We've been explaining the difficulties that the counties face. We've been explaining that we've been asked to seek this funding by our colleagues in the Minnesota County Attorneys Association, and for 4 years, we've been told no. But now the answer is yes, yes. And it's not a yes to the AG's office. It's a yes to victims. It's a yes to communities. It's a yes to people who are yearning for justice. And let me just say, you know, I'll just mention a few cases. In Albert Lee, some young man got one of these switches that you can put on a gun, shot off 80 rounds, and actually hit a police officer. Thank goodness the officer had on a protective vest, or else we could have lost that officer. We prosecuted that person for first-degree attempted murder, and we convicted him. That brought a sense of closure and justice to the community, and I'm glad that the Attorney General could help that southern Minnesota county in that case. Or in Todd County, where great community pillars were doing nothing but living their lives in their golden years, and their son murdered them and devastated all the siblings and then took off to Mexico. We prosecuted that person who did that. He's serving life sentence right now. It's important to know that I could go on and on and on. We have prosecuted many, many cases in my time at the Attorney General's office, but it's important to know that of our 87 counties, about 44 of them have 3 or fewer county attorneys. So some people would say, well, we're just going to give more money straight to the county attorneys. That really wouldn't help. Why wouldn't that help? Because if you don't see a murder or a serious felony like criminal sexual conduct or something, or sex trafficking, human trafficking, if you don't see it but every 4 or 5 years, you never get to build up the experience that you need to do that. And then also, even if you do have the experience, even if you know what you're doing, those county attorneys need to be able to cover the county board meetings, county, you know, their road condemnations. There's a whole range of legal issues that county attorneys have to face in rural communities. The Attorney General's office, pursuant to Minnesota Statute 8.01, is specifically identified as the backup prosecutor for our 87 county attorneys. We take that role seriously, and we performed it very, very well. Up until around 20 years ago, when due to budgetary pressures, the Attorney General's office began to shrink that office. Today, we want to really build it back. Today, we recognize the counties in need the help. We recognize the spike in crime. We recognize the financial and fiscal pressures on our counties. And mostly, we recognize the pain of the victims. So we're stepping up. We're looking forward to working hard with these funds that the state legislature will deliver. And I just want to say a special thank you to my colleagues in the Senate and in the House and in the governor's office and in the county attorney's office and among the families who have supported this effort all along the way. I look forward to tonight's vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So today is Justice Day in the Minnesota House, and we're going to be taking up two very important bills that we're talking about in our press conference today. The first, as was mentioned, is funding, much needed funding for the Attorney General's office. And this was a bill that I carried for 4 years. Representative Hewitt has done an amazing job carrying it this year. And 4 years ago, the Attorney General's office had one criminal prosecutor in the office. Now there are 3. And this bill would add an additional 7. And even that doesn't get back to the historic levels from 20 to 25 years ago for where this office used to be in doing criminal prosecutions. And this has been a call that we've heard loud and clear from our counties and from the county attorneys for 4 years, asking for this money, asking for the help. The Attorney General walked through some of the really compelling, moving cases that the office is able to help out with, only at the request of the county attorney. This is not something that the Attorney General's office can initiate. It has to be on request. And we know that there are many more cases that could be helped with. In fact, between 70 to 80 new cases could be added from this office with these additional prosecutors each year. So this is really substantial law enforcement work to try to help keep our communities safe. And we know it's important, and we know we're going to get it done today. We also know that our public defender systems have been grossly underfunded for many years, and that's just been something we've been okay with, or if not okay with, that we've accepted, that we haven't tackled. When I was in law school, I spent a summer in a public defender's office, and the standard was that oftentimes you'd get handed the file as you were walking in to go in front of the judge, and you'd have to kind of figure out what sort of argument you were going to make on the fly. That's not justice, right? We need to have individuals who are given the time and the space and the caseloads that they need to provide sufficient, excellent representation to all Minnesotans, because that is a constitutional obligation that we have. And I want to just thank Chair Becker-Finn for being such a champion on this issue and fighting so hard so that the status quo that we've had for so long isn't no longer acceptable to us, and we're going to actually stand up and fully fund the office. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chair Becker-Finn.
Thank you. So the bill's really simple. It's probably one of the most simple bills that we will vote it on off the House floor this year. It funds something that we as a state are constitutionally required to fund. And the core of our criminal justice system in the United States rests on a few principles that hopefully we're all familiar with. If you've watched Law and Order, or many people have interacted with our system, you're innocent until you're proven guilty, and that you must be provided a lawyer, assistance of counsel. The Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution clearly states that you have a right to an attorney if you are charged with a crime and faced with your liberty being withheld. And the U.S. Supreme Court has held that it's the responsibility of the states to fund our public defense system. It's well-established, settled law. And yet we as a state have been failing our citizens for decades, since the inception of the State Public Defender's Office. It's not just another line in our budget. So you'll see it's a bigger number because it's actually the ongoing funding that would typically be in an omnibus bill at the end of session. However, we thought that this was important enough that we lifted up that it could stand on its own. This is something that was agreed to at the end of session last year, but for the other sort of pitfalls in reaching agreement, we had bipartisan, bicameral agreement on this bill. The integrity of our entire justice system rests on the public defense system. If you want to talk about freedom, you want to talk about liberty, none of those rights mean anything if you don't have assistance of counsel and you don't have an adequate assistance of counsel. Outcomes should not be dictated based on your access to wealth. House File 90 gets us to a place where at least meeting minimum caseload standards, and with the current surplus, we can certainly afford to provide a constitutionally mandated right to our citizens. Every single person in this room, every single person listening to me speak right now knows someone and cares about someone who at some point has needed the assistance of an attorney. And I bet that you hope that that attorney had the time to adequately prepare and give your case the attention that it deserves. And whether that attorney gave your case the attention that it deserves should not depend on how much money you have access to. Shouldn't depend on your bank account. We should all have access to the adequate counsel. This bill's been supported, like I said, for many years. We've been working on this for a long time. This actually came from finally asking the question, not just coming to us and asking for a 2.5%, 3%, COLA increases, but asking the question, what do you actually need to do this right? And these numbers, these were the answers we were given of how we can do this right. And so we've had bipartisan, nearly unanimous support over the last 3 years in this effort to move this forward, and just really grateful that we can finally get it across a little bit closer to the governor's desk today. And with that, I will open us all up for questions.
Does the bill, does it address, is it just caseloads, or does it address the wage disparity with prosecutors, or?
Yeah, so this is just the straight funding, as we have on the record in, the testimony that's been taken from the Board of Public Defense. It would address both those things, and I'm glad you brought that up, because there are really multiple problems with the way things currently are, and that we don't have enough public defenders doing the work. So they're just, we have people doing the work of one person doing the work of 2 or 3 attorneys. So we need to hire more people. And part of that is making sure that those salaries are more in line with other public attorneys in our system. So it would both increase wages and increase staffing. It would be able to meet both those things.
So this is setting the budget then for the Board of Public Defense, basically for the next biennium. You're doing that now rather than waiting until later.
Correct. One, we wanted to draw attention to this issue because it's that important, and 2, this allows the public defense system to start looking at hiring and getting ready so they can actually work towards being able to put that in place as soon as that funding takes effect.
You mentioned bipartisan support. What was the hang-up before then? We know what the hang-up was with funding for the Attorney General, but.
I was literally the Senate being willing to pass any omnibus bill last session. We tried to do it as a standalone. We tried to do a mini omnibus, and at the end of session, they just didn't have the will to get a bill across the finish line. But, this funding for public defense last year, because it different year, we were looking at 23 funding as opposed to 24, 25 funding. But last year, it increased funding, an additional $50 million a year for this system, passed the floor of the Senate, even with the Republicans in control.
Attorney General Ellison, how soon might you be able to get these new prosecutors in your office on board? And I think the majority leader said 70 to 80 new cases a year. Can you just give us a feel for what types of cases might fall into your lap?
Well, if things go as planned tonight, we hope the governor will sign the bill quickly. And I've talked to the governor, expect that is what will happen. And then we will begin hiring people right away. We've already began to put the word out that we're going to be hiring criminal prosecutors. So, I expect, generally when we put an ad out for hiring, we get a great response. So we hope that that'll work well and quickly. And so I would say within a couple of months, 6 weeks to 8 weeks, we should be close to being staffed up with the new group, and then we'll be training them, working with them, things like that. I think you asked what kind of cases. Well, the counties are good. The county attorneys are good lawyers, so they don't need us to do 5th-degree controlled substance. They don't need us to do a lot of kind of theft cases. They can do all those kind of cases. But when you look at a case like a homicide or murder, you're going to be in trial for maybe 8 weeks, and you cannot afford to have the everyday county attorney not doing what the everyday county attorney does. And so we're talking about murder, first-degree criminal sexual conduct, arson, manslaughter, serious criminal vehicular homicide. We've done some misdemeanor environmental cases because we didn't, because, we needed hydraulic experts in hydrology and things like that. So cases that are complex and higher-level felonies, some of these folks may take some appellate files, and of course, they would also be eligible to do sexually, involuntary commitments for sexually dangerous predators. So those are the cases.
Are there cases you've been turning down, then?
Well, so not really, because here's why. Because we work with the county attorneys regularly. They know us, we know them. We have a monthly meeting. We go, and they don't ask us to do cases they know we can't, that they know that we can't do. So it's, so we really don't have a bunch of cases that we've turned down. But it's clear that they tell us if you could do this, we would be very happy for you to do it. So it would relieve great pressure on the system. It would relieve other counties from having to take over other counties' cases. And the system would work as designed, because there is no provision in Minnesota law for a county to say, a tiny county to go to a larger county and say, take this case for us, please. It's not illegal, but it's not contemplated in Minnesota statute. Minnesota statute 8.01 says that if it's more than you could handle, call the Attorney General. But because of decisions that were made, budgetary and other, we weren't in a position to do as many as we should have and could have, but now we will.
How much money is being allocated for your bill for this session and also going forward?
I think 269 and then well, why don't we let the author answer?
You got it right. It was 269 and then 4.2 in the legs. So it's 4.2 for the next biennium. So it's 269 right away. As the AG said here earlier, that we really need to get going on this. We're backlogged, and he needs to hire people. And so we're appropriating funds right away this session. And then 2.6 in both years of the biennium.
So that money for the next biennium, that's going to be on top of whatever budget finally gets set for your office.
Right.
Yep.
So it's 269 right away, and it's 2.6 for each of the next years of the biennium?
Right, so it's about 3 to 4, 5. Don't ask me to do math, folks.
How many did they used to have? Way back when? 12.
So when Skip Humphrey, 1999, left the office, there were 12.
Keith Campbell, Mike.
Oh, sorry. When Skip Humphrey left, there were 12 criminal prosecutors. And they were legendary. I mean, they were great personalities who were known all over the state because they would come in and help. In fact, in the mid-1990s, when I was the director of the Legal Rights Center, I used to be a public defender myself. We had a case with John Doherty, who was a great lawyer, wonderful lawyer, and in Carver County and other, and that wasn't the only one. We encountered them. We encountered AG staff on a regular basis because they, whenever we had a heavy lift case, it was common for them to show up.
It should be a big change, though. I mean, that's a huge number of cases on very serious crimes that obviously these county attorneys must be struggling with. I mean, what kind of impact do you think that's going to have on especially out state Minnesota?
I think it's going to really ease budgetary pressure on rural counties. It may not solve every problem, but it will solve a lot of problems. I think it will be highly beneficial. And let me just say, let me applaud the Minnesota State Legislature for doing something specifically to benefit our rural counties and communities. It's a great thing they're doing, and I'm glad to be part of it.
We had arguments during the campaign internally in our newsroom about the fact that your office handled the Chauvin and Potter cases.
Right.
And people were like, see, he does do prosecution. Those were exceptional situations, correct?
Right. Well, they're exceptional because they come from the big counties. The problem for Hennepin County or Ramsey County wasn't that they don't have the personnel. The problem was that there was a need to communicate to the public that the matter would be handled with independence, and so that's why we were brought into those cases. We may get brought into some of those cases into the future, but the point is, we stand ready for all 87 counties. But I can assure you that the greater bulk, I mean, 2 out of the 44 what is it? I think the number, 2 out of the 47 are from Hennepin County. Now, if you count the cases that where we decline. Greater Minnesota. 2 out, right, all the remainder after Chauvin and Potter. But I will also say the Amir Locke case, we didn't charge, but we did evaluate and decline charging. There was a Ramsey County case involving an officer that we declined. So those cases we do count because they take a lot of people to just evaluate the evidence. But almost all of the cases, I mean, like literally, only a few out of a great number are for the metro. The rest are for the greater Minnesota.
Mr. Majority Leader, this has been touched on a little bit, but can you just speak from a broader perspective from leadership about what kinds of bills with money in them will kind of advance to the floor before we have sort of broader agreements on spending, whether it's targets or otherwise? How do you decide as a philosophy what gets to move now in addition to just the policy bills?
I think you're seeing that we are not waiting. We want to get work done on behalf of Minnesotans. And so where there's agreement with the House and the Senate and the governor, then we're going to try to move those pieces of legislation. So we're taking up funding bills today. We're going to be taking up some funding bills later this week. We've done so already with some of the bills we passed early on unemployment insurance for minors and the tax conformity legislation. Those were broad bipartisan bills, by the way. I think we've heard a lot of good feedback, too, from our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that we are moving bills independently, that we can debate on their own and that we can vote on their own. But to do that requires us to move early in session. We can't wait until the end and then hope that we can have votes on a lot of different bills. We have to start now to be able to have independent votes on a lot of these different bills. So I think that's why you're seeing so much early action, is that we have a lot of work that hasn't gotten done yet that we need to catch up on. But we also want to make sure that we're doing the process right, that we have the ability wherever we can to move bills on their own.
We have time for one more question.
So it's about agreement more than cost? Like, could you have something in the $1 billion range that could move now?
Yes, absolutely. We're not afraid to move big spending bills where there's agreement, and I suspect that some of the bills you'll see coming up in the next week or two will be larger dollar amounts. But the public defender's bill is not small.
What's the biennium change in the public defender's bill?
I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but it's essentially, it's about 50 million. So it's 43 million above base in the first year, sort of acknowledging that'll take a little bit of time to ramp up. And then it's closer to like a 67, I think, million going forward. And then that's in the tails ongoing. The idea is that we have the ability now, like, let's build up this system so it is actually functional, so we can stop coming back and sort of forcing a constitutionally mandated system to come begging for money at the legislature every year. It's one of very few things in our Constitution we have to do, and so that's sort of acknowledging that that's a bigger bill. And when we did have really good feedback, even in the Ways and Means Committee, as I also teach legislative process, and from a good government standpoint, being able to move these funding bills on their own, I think speaks to the way we wanna run things.
Thanks, everybody.
Does it give the money in aggregate to the Board of Public Defense, or does it prescribe how the money should be spent, or does it go to the district?
It's direct funding to the Board of Public Defense. That's how we've always done it. Obviously, there's, if folks remember what happened with the Teamsters, and, we almost had our public defenders go on strike over their pay and the disparities there last year. Go do your homework. But this is the way we do it, and it's a state system. It isn't, we don't line item those things.
But I think we're everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, we're all done.
Just in terms of the pacing of this bill, it looks like it's a slight wording variation between what passed the Senate and the House on the AG's bill. It's not going straight to the governor after action tonight, right? We'll have to,
The AG's bill?
the AG's bill.
I know we're taking up the Senate file today, so
You are taking it?
we're taking up the Senate file, so it'll go straight.
Thank
Thanks.
you, everyone.
Good plan, yeah.